Welcome everyone to the KIX EMAP workshop, Innovation to Action, Grant Writing for Research Projects. My name is Veronika Mosolova. I'm the project officer for the KIX EMAP Hub. I will be the technical host for the session today. As always, I'll start with a short technical introduction before we start the session. Welcome everyone who just joined. Before we start, we'd like to remind you that we have language interpretation in English, Arabic, and Russian at this event. You can enable it and select the language channel of your preference by going to the interpretation button at the bottom of the screen. Уважаемые участники, как всегда, доступен синхронный перевод на русский язык. Вы можете выбрать языковой канал на нижней панели меню, кликнув на иконку перевода.
خلال الاجتماع سيكون هناك ترجمة فورية باللغة العربية
During the meeting, you will have interpretation into Arabic, so please press on the interpretation button in order to listen to Arabic.
We'd like to remind you that due to the room size, all microphones will be muted. We invite you to keep your camera on if possible to create a friendlier and more engaging atmosphere at this workshop. Please know that this event is being recorded and the recordings will be made publicly available. And a quick reminder for those who just joined, we have language interpretation into English, Arabic, and Russian. We invite you to change your name in the participants window. Please write your full name and your organization and your country. We also invite you to introduce yourself in the chat. As well, we invite you to write your full name, your organization, and your country. And you can also use the chat in case of any problems. Please write to the KIX EMAP team in the chat. There will be several Q&A sessions at this event. However, you can ask your questions in the chat at any time during the session. Please write your full name and your country when you ask the question. You can also ask your questions in Russian or Arabic. We have a team of translators who will help to translate your question into English so the speakers can reply to you. And when asking your question, please write your country and your full name. And please only use the chat for questions related to the presentations, not for promotional messages without prior agreement with the KIX EMAP Hub. We remind you that we have launched our Facebook and our YouTube pages, and we have been active on Twitter, X for some time right now. So you can find us at KIX EMAP, and by using our official hashtags KIX EMAP and GPKIX. Please check out our new Facebook page and engage with us. You can also comment after this event regarding your with your impressions, your thoughts, engage with us on those platforms. And for more information, you can always visit our website, norg.org/KIXEMAP. Thank you for your attention. I wish everyone a fruitful event, and I would like to give the floor to the KIX EMAP director, José Canelias, who will introduce the session and the speakers. José, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Veronica. So hello, everyone, and warm welcome to the KIX EMAP workshop, Innovation to Action, Grant Writing for Applied Research Projects. Before we jump to the workshop, a couple of words about KIX and our KIX EMAP Hub. So KIX, the Knowledge Innovation Exchange Program, is a result of a collaboration between GPE, our program funder, and the International Development Research Center, IDRC, in Canada, who is the program implementer. This collaboration resulted from a demand from GPE partner countries who requested the creation of a program that would promote the greater use of research evidence for policy and planning in their education systems. With this goal, the KIX program was created in 2020, and after first 3 years of work with positive feedback from countries, the program was, during the summer, extended up to 2027. So the KIX program has two key mechanisms. One is the applied research projects, which are under the direct supervision of IDRC in Canada. So KIX funds applied research on national education priorities and on the scaling analysis of successful education innovations. Currently, we have 2 open calls for research grants on the topics of early learning and teaching, and this open call is closing in 15th of January. So far, over 40 KIX research grants were awarded to more than 50 GPE countries in the past years on the following themes: use of data, gender equality, equity and inclusion, early childhood education, and teacher professional development. The second KIX mechanism, so the first KIX mechanism is KIX Applied Research Projects. The second KIX mechanism is the one aimed for knowledge exchange among GPE partner countries. Our KIX EMAP Hub, EMAP stands for Europe, Middle East and North Africa, and Asia Pacific, is one of the 4 regional hubs of the KIX program. There are 2 regional hubs in Africa, 1 in Latin America, and then we have our EMAP Hub. Each hub works with national teams, country national teams. Our hub currently covers 36 countries, and we have recently welcomed new countries such as Indonesia, Philippines, Sri Lanka, Tunisia, Ukraine, and 9 Pacific Island states: Fiji, Kiribati, Marshall Islands, Federated States of Micronesia, Samoa, Solomon Islands, Tonga, Tuvalu, and Vanuatu. The EMAP Hub is hosted by NORAG in Geneva, and our work is aimed at promoting the use of research evidence for policy and planning by surfacing, amplifying, and disseminating knowledge and research evidence that exists in GPE countries. Under these mandates, the Hub provides opportunities for national experts to strengthen their knowledge and skills on how to produce and better use research evidence. And this workshop today is exactly aimed at sharing knowledge, experiences on how to develop a proposal for applied research grants. As you probably know, and as I just mentioned, there are 2 open calls for KIX Applied Research Grants on early learning and teaching, which are directly managed by IGRC and not by our hub. So while we as a hub are not able to give feedback, advice, or support a specific grant proposal that answers these KIX calls, we are organizing this workshop focusing on sharing experiences on how to develop a strong proposal and providing you with resources and tools that, while not targeted to address any specific call, we hopefully will help you in writing strong proposals for KIX or any other grant opportunities that you find. So let's embark in our workshop journey, which will be led by 3 KIX EMAP colleagues. And I'll briefly introduce the 3 of them. Amy Crompton, she's the knowledge lead for Southeast Asia and Pacific region. She has diverse experience researching and developing culturally and contextually relevant education solutions. Amy holds an educational doctorate in international education and development from Teachers College, Columbia University. Our second colleague that is going to facilitate today's workshop is Rasha Sharaf. Rasha is KIX EMAP knowledge lead for South Asia, Middle East, and North Africa sub-region. She's also professor of international comparative education and education administration at L1 University in Egypt, and she's also NORAC's regional editor for the Arabic special issues. Our third colleague that is facilitating our workshop today is Arushi Terway. Arushi Terway is senior advisor for KIX EMAP Hub, and she leads NORAC's work under the team of private sector approaches in education, including innovative financing, philanthropy and education, public-private partnerships, and private sector engagement in the right to education movement. Arushi holds a doctorate in education from Teachers College, Columbia University. Before giving the floor to Amy Crompton, I invite all the participants to include at any moment of the workshop your thoughts, your comments, and your questions so that we can have a lively learning and knowledge exchange session. So, thank you all, and over to you, Amy.
Thanks, Jose Luis. Welcome, everybody. It's so nice to see so many familiar names in this meeting. Thank you for joining. I think if we can, yes, thank you, Arushi, screen share. Today, we'll talk about the who, what, why, how, and so what of proposal writing, specifically focusing on applied research project proposals. So just as Jose Luis mentioned, this workshop is tailored to general proposal writing. It's not tailored to a specific call for proposals. However, the content of today's workshop should be applicable to any call for proposals that you encounter. So we have a lot to cover today in just 2 hours. So that means we're just going to scratch the surface with some of the basics, but we do hope that you'll walk away with some new perspectives and tools that you can apply to your own writing. So we'll start with the who, why, and what. Then we'll pause for a 10-minute Q&A and then move on to the how, which will be encompassing methods and budgeting, do another Q&A, and then move on to the final part 4 of the workshop, the so what, which will discuss sharing knowledge and measuring results. And then we'll conclude with a final Q&A. So we hope that you'll engage with the workshop activities by responding in the chat, to the polls, and by raising your hand if the activity calls for that. And please do share your questions in the chat. I think we found in our previous workshop on grant writing that all of you had a lot of really good questions, and that really enhanced the dialogue in the workshop to address your specific concerns and questions. So please do engage in the chat. Okay, so let's get started. Just a general introduction about the proposal. So first, I want you to just think about and keep in mind that when you're writing a proposal, there's multiple members of a review committee or panel that are reviewing that. So what do the readers want to know? So according to Przewalski and Solomon in 1995, the reviewers read with these 3 main questions in mind. And I think it's a good way to start just thinking about what are we going to learn as a result of the proposed project that we do not know now. So thinking about goals, aims, and outcomes. Then the why. Why is it worth knowing? So what is the significance of the research project? Why is it important, and what will its impact be? And then how? How do we know that the conclusions are valid? So what is the criteria for success? So readers are reading and they want these questions answered. And as you'll see, these 3 questions align with the common elements of most research grant proposals. So let's take a look at that. What are these common elements? So these are, I'm sure, very familiar to most of you. There's an overview, an introduction, an examination of a need or a problem, the description of your project. That's a big section. The budget and resources to support your research, implementing your research project, and then other sections that vary by specific proposal requirements. And that's kind of what I really would like to note here. We'll dive into some of these elements today and how you might, consider some ways to consider writing each of these sections, but it is important to note that each call for proposals has specific guidelines, and it's very important to really dive into that and follow all the guidelines for that particular grant. Once you get a handle of what that is, you might need to reframe your project to fit those requirements. And if it doesn't fit, then you might reconsider applying for that call. You don't need to apply for everything. Something that you think that your existing idea that you might already have done research on, or you might already have submitted a proposal for a different funding organization, for example, if it doesn't fit that specific proposal guidelines, you may need to reconsider doing that. And I do want to mention in, thinking about the funding, the funder, and why proposals get rejected. Maybe this is a question I can ask you in the chat. What do you think are the main reasons that proposals may not be accepted, may be rejected for funding? we can just get a couple answers in the chat. What are the quality? Not enough impact. Incorrect budget. Not realistic. Relevance. Not priority. Not fit with the call. Yes, these are great answers. Clarity. Yes, clarity, non-compliance with guidelines. Yes, 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 and yes, yes. The three main reasons are: one, it's out of scope. So that means that it doesn't fit with the funding program's mission or goals. So it's deemed out of scope. Two, that it's ineligible. Why? Because as some of you mentioned, it's not compliant with the guidelines. And then three, that it is clarity. It doesn't fully and clearly answer the questions that are set out in the proposal requirements. Great. Thanks for your participation in that. I also just want to share this resource here at the end. You'll see there's a grant. Proposal writing is exciting, imaginative work. Some of today's resources are drawn from this very comprehensive writer's handbook. So this is something that you can dive in deeper to after this workshop. Okay, so these are the common elements. We have an idea of what we need to, how we might need to approach them so they fit within the funding organization's requirements. And I'd just like to take a moment to look at the description of your project, because that's a big one. If we can go to the next slide. The project design. Oh, sorry, you were in the right one. Is taking a look at what might help you is that in this research, in your research proposal, everything is interconnected, but it often centers around your project design. So this chart here that my colleague Rasha will dive into a little bit later as well is a really handy way to think about developing that section. So you want to decide what type of research you're conducting and why. Then move down the flow chart to data collection tools. What tools are appropriate for the research you'll conduct? Moving on to research value, continuously think about the value of it and how you frame that within your proposal. Is it introducing an innovative approach? Does it support national priorities, et cetera? And then lastly, considering the sustainability of your research outcomes. Will it inform policy, lead to curriculum revisions? How will you disseminate the research to relevant stakeholders? So that's a lot, and this also will include this resource for you to use as you're developing your proposals. Okay, great. Okay, so that's just a brief introduction to components of the proposal, and now we're going to move on to the who and the why, which is thinking about the audience, the purpose, and the justification, and how you are going to write about that in your proposal. So firstly, let's think about the audience. Who is the reader, and what is the funding's organization mission, goals, and values? Thinking about those first and foremost will help you frame the importance of your project. So what is a mission? What does that even mean? A mission is what sets you apart. So it defines your specific purpose as an organization. And values are what drives the organizations, what they believe in. So you want to consider, how does your research project align with the funding organization's mission, goals, and values? Okay, let's do a quick exercise to take a look at that in practice. Let's look at this mission statement from a very common funding organization, USAID. And as we read this, let's just think about, and you can type in the chat, the key words that you notice that represent the mission, values, and goals. Okay, so get ready. We promote and demonstrate democratic values abroad and advance a free, peaceful, and prosperous world. In support of America's foreign policy, leads the U.S. government's international development and disaster assistance through partnerships and investments that save lives, reduce poverty, strengthen democratic governance, and help people emerge from humanitarian crises and progress beyond assistance. So what are the key words here that you notice? Just type them in the chat. that exemplify the mission, values, and goals. Great, yes. Democracy, prosperity, disaster assistance, reduce poverty reduction. So if you're writing a proposal, that's what you'd want to sort of pull out. How does your specific research project align with those goals? And then you'll want to think about what is your justification and your evidence that will align with that. Great. Okay. Next, you want to consider what's your purpose? What is the purpose or the goal of your research project? The purpose of your project should flow from the problem statement to address the proposed problem. So if you'll think about the purpose arises from addressing a problem to help close the gap. So this simple equation, problem plus gap, there you go, there's your purpose. So you want to answer the questions, why are you doing this research? Think about its purpose, what is it, and how does it align, again, with the mission and goals of the funding organization? Once you sort of brainstorm these things, you could do this, you know, as a brainstorming meeting with your team. Use this as an exercise to start getting writing. Think about your audience, do this exact exercise with your idea, and then you might come up with a brief outline of how you might start framing your proposal. Okay, let's take a look at an example of figuring out problem, gap, and purpose. So let's read this project description, and then in the chat, I'd like you to say, what is the problem and gap that this project is addressing? And what is the purpose? So on the rural island of Great Place, XYZ country, Organization A and Organization B designed and implemented a DRR ECD intervention to provide preschool children and teachers with information and resources to help them mitigate and respond appropriately to disasters that occur on the island, earthquakes, floods, and landslides. So what is the problem and gap here? Just type that in the chat. Great. I see some really good answers in the chat. Yeah, the problem here is that there's disasters occurring frequently. And the gap is that the residents, the islanders, are not equipped with enough information to respond in the school settings specifically. So the purpose of the project is to provide that knowledge and those resources to teachers and students in those preschools. Okay, and then if you're thinking about, you know, from that's your purpose, then you would go back and think about, well, how does this align with the funding organization's mission and goals? So if say this was responding to a USAID call for proposals, we can see a connection here between responding to humanitarian crisis potentially and this intervention or this research. Great. Okay, let's move on. So once you have a clear purpose, you need to think about how you will present the justification for that in your proposal. So remember, your project is important because it's responding to a gap in the resources, knowledge, or there's an opportunity that really needs to be filled. So to establish the value of your project, you need to clarify the need or problem that your project responds to. And I know most of you are very familiar with this, framing your context. You're all experts in your own context. And we're here in the justification, we'll just look at what could be good examples or types of evidence to show that. And that's another exercise that you might be able to do with your team when you're putting together a proposal, is like, think about what are all these categories of justification that we might draw from. So early in your proposal, you want to establish the context for the problem, so the background. And if this problem affects a particular population, you'd want to describe that group and include any data that you have if it's appropriate. In a lot of research grants, this examination can take the form of a short literature review, clarifying that you've read extensively, you understand this scholarly context and significance of your project. But even in research grants, it's still important to clarify why this project will make a wider positive impact and not just how it's answering a specific academic question. Okay, let's take a look at, again, some practical examples here. And in this excerpt, you'll see there's some sentences highlighted here. And we'll look at this, and I want you to think about, like, what is the type of evidence that those different colors are representing? So we'll read through this and think about what's the problem here, what's the need, and then what types of data and description are being used as justification. Okay, so we'll think about that. Okay, so the right kinds of teacher professional development can directly contribute to improved student performance. In countries Sandy Desert and Mountain Views, more than 40% of teachers live in rural areas without access to consistent TPD opportunities. In addition, there's an insufficient supply of experienced teachers in these areas. These two countries must consider how they can improve both the quantity and quality of their diminished teacher workforce. Solving these two challenges requires innovative thinking and updated tools and approaches. Okay, so what's the problem here? I see a couple answers. I'll give you another few seconds to have other people process this information. Great. Yes, the problem is there's a shortage of teachers, particularly experienced ones in rural areas. And the need is that there's more TPD is needed. So what are these purple and blue? What is the purple type of evidence or justification? What is it providing? Literature-based evidence, that's right. The purple is showing evidence from the literature. And what is the blue showing? Data, that's right. A data and description of the specific context. Here are two contexts in both country, Sandy Desert and Mountain Views. Yes, so it's important to think about what is the evidence that from the literature that will support the justification, and also what data do I have available that will also support that. Okay, and let's move on to two other types of justification, which is importance and impact. So this is a continued excerpt from what we just read, and we see two different colors here, yellow and green. And we'll want to, let's read through this and think about what types of justification are the yellow and the green. So mobile technology is a tool that can be used to provide teachers with professional development to improve learning outcomes for students. Teachers in these contexts already have these devices paired with connectivity, even in remote areas. Mobile phones provide flexible options for training and learning, offering asynchronous and synchronous at times that are convenient for the teacher. In addition, the ministries of education in both countries are amending existing requirements for TPD to equally recognize online TPD programs. In fact, Mountain View's MOE is increasing the budget for mobile technology for teachers in the 24-25 budget framework. Delivering TPD through mobile app technology provides more equitable access to quality, ongoing teacher learning experiences, which in turn can lead to better student learning outcomes. So I think there's a key here in the title, that what is the yellow? What kind of justification is the yellow exemplifying here? Yes, great, Kinley's policy support. Yeah, which is showing the importance to that local context. So here it's the importance of this to the local context, the Ministry of Education. It shows that it's sustainable because there's buy-in from the ministry. Great. And then what is the green here? Right. The green here is the impact. Yeah, I see somebody wrote impact. That's right. It's showing the potential impact. And that's what also funders want to know. They want to back or award funds to something that is sustainable and connects your research to priorities in the wider context. So you want to think about the audience in terms of what justification can be helpful to emphasize. So does the funder focus on innovation? If so, then highlight how your project is different from other research projects. Audience purpose and justification are really key to think about when you begin to write your proposal, and then you can continually refer back to them in the major sections of your proposal. So especially when you're mapping out your activities and linking them to the intended results, as you're going to see in the next section. Great. So these 4 types of justification, really important to think about. There's something that you can do as an exercise with your team, thinking about like what do we have? How can we show importance, impact? Where can we insert the relevant data and draw from the literature? Great. Okay, so I think we're going to move on to the what. So I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Arushi. And if you have any questions about this first part, please feel free to enter it in the chat and we'll address your questions at the end of this next section. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy, for a really good description of justifying why you're going to be engaging in this initiative at all. So I want to remind everyone that the way we have framed this particular workshop is to really talk about applied research. So a lot of the material for a research proposal is completely applicable to any proposal you write and the material we are sharing here. But we are adding another layer for a lot of the practitioners that are in our audience on how you can be doing applied research on projects that you're implementing. So there can be a project component and then a research on top of that project to show how that particular project is having an impact. So how do you describe that? How do you tell the readers of your proposal what is it that you're doing? So in this section, I will be talking about activities, processes, how to describe that, and then how to link it to the outputs you'll be achieving, and then the outcomes and impact that you're hoping to achieve through the project implementation and research implementation. So with that, this is the largest chunk of any research proposal, any funding, even for program funding. This is the largest chunk. This is where you describe what is it that you're going to be doing as a team. So this is the section where you describe in details the activities you're going to be engaging in to achieve the intended results. So you've described a little bit of what results you're trying to achieve in the introduction section and justifying why you need those things. And this is where you're going to elaborate on everything. So in an applied research proposal, you would need to describe two separate components. One would be the component of the intervention itself. What is the project that you're trying to implement? And then what is the research you're going to do on that intervention to show what happened in that project and what success you had, and also show how the activities were getting to the results that you had hoped to achieve. So in the orange section here, you will see we're continuing on with the example that Amy was giving on teacher professional development. So if your team wants to implement a teacher professional development intervention, that's the intervention description is your program description, but then you will say what that will achieve, which is improve teacher skills. But then you will also describe the research that you will do on the intervention, the teacher professional development intervention itself, and then show that the result of the research that you will do on that will it lead to improved knowledge on how teacher professional development interventions work in that country. Now, when you're doing that in a program description, you also need to be upfront with your funders on what assumptions you're making, and then what risks you already expect to be encountering while implementing your research and your program. So assumptions usually mean conditions that are needed. You're assuming that certain things are already there in your context that will help you be successful. And then the risks are things, unforeseen things that may end up happening that will actually hinder the achievement of your results. So those two things are also essential to describe. Now, we all have a tendency to go with things that we already know and then respond to what the funder request for proposal is asking. So often we just start describing maybe an intervention we have already designed, we have implemented before, but are trying to actually scale up. We would just go ahead and list like, here's what we are able to do, and a long list of activities. And then we slap on some of the results that the funder is asking for, or your team has said, hypothetically, we'll reach those. But what often goes missing is a step back into thinking about how exactly are these activities that we are thinking about are going to logically lead to those results. So for that, something we suggest using is called theory of change. Many of you have used it in many different ways, but I would recommend using the theory of change approach in writing your proposal itself. So it's a useful tool to get your own team members on the same page on the logic of how the activities are going to lead to the results. And then also a really good way to explain your vision to the audience that's reading your funding proposal. So a theory of change can be used to write that program description very easily, because it's describing that logic. It's an articulation of how the activities, the interventions are going to result into the outcomes and impact that you're hoping for. And then how the research component itself will actually yield to some of those outcomes. Some of you may have also seen similar terms that usually refer to similar concepts. They're slightly different, but these are also tools: results chain, results framework, a logic model, or log frame. Most of these have common components as theory of change. I will go more in depth about theory of change, but you will be able to see very similar components in the other methods as well. But most of these will have some kind of a description of inputs, what resources are needed, some description on activities that you're going to be engaging in, then the direct results of those activities as in outputs, and then indirect results as outcomes, and then eventual impact you want to have. So these are very typical components that go into a theory of change, a results framework, chain, all of those methodologies. So what does that mean? How is the theory of change slightly different? Theory of change has two main components. when you're thinking about it. It usually has a diagram that represents the entire thing. But more importantly, it has a narrative that describes the change that your project staff or the designers of the intervention and the research are envisioning, right? So what change is the expected outcome of everything? So what's the purpose, the goal, impact, those types of things. So the example we are showing on teacher professional development, the aim, the impact that we are trying to reach, the change, is improve teacher skills. And then the other key component is the theory of how will you get to that change. This is where the project staffs and designers' idea of how and why this will happen, that logic. So with the mobile phone teacher professional development, potentially that project that we started describing, if teachers use some kind of a mobile phone TPD app, they will be able to build additional skills. That's a very simplistic way of saying why some kind of a TPD delivered through mobile phones will lead to improved teacher skills. So you have to describe, like, what is it that you're going to be doing on that project? Describe the actual activities. So activities are also known as processes. So in a theory of change, we talk a little bit more on the process that you will go through to do that. And here, again, for an applied research, you have to describe the intervention itself. What are the different components of the intervention activities? And then what are the research activities that you're going to be engaging in to see the success of the intervention itself? So all of that will need to be described in the project description. So I'm giving you a slightly longer program excerpt here. And right after this, we will run a little quiz poll for everyone. But let me read out this excerpt where we will try to see what activities can be designed here, okay? So this is a made-up example. University of Learning, a private company, NGO called Tech Literate Solutions, and the Ministry of Education from both the country Sandy Desert and country Mountain View want to partner up to develop and implement a teacher professional development program. And they want to deliver this program through mobile phones to provide flexible options for training and learning, offering both synchronous and asynchronous. So there could be some activities like this where everyone comes together at the same time, or activities where they are working, individual teachers are working on their own on the mobile phone. They've chosen the mobile phone app because of the fact that even in the most remote areas, teachers actually do have mobile phones and have very good internet connectivity. They don't have access necessarily to a teacher professional development center, teacher training institute, but they have their phone. So that's the program that these partners want to implement in these two countries. And then University of Learning, as a research institution, also wants to conduct applied research during the program development and implementation to really understand the success of this program. Okay? So this is where a description comes in, and we will try to answer some questions here. So in your chat messages, you will see translations of these questions and of the poll. Let me start the poll here. On your screen, you should see the description again at this time. And the question is, what activities would you design to implement a teacher professional development program using mobile phone apps in these countries? There are several options here, 4 options. Tell me which option do you think is the best? There could be multiple things happening, but what's the best thing to do? Develop a teacher professional development mobile phone app, training sessions for teachers on how to use the app, purchase mobile phones for all teachers, build teacher training centers in all school districts. So let's see how many responses. So start filling this out, and I will show you the results very quickly and explain some of the answers. Okay. I'm gonna give it another minute. Some people are still thinking. Okay. All right. I'm ending the poll now, so please, you can stop answering the questions. Most of you have answered the questions already. Okay, let me give it another minute. I see more people are answering questions now. Okay, let me end the poll now. Here. Now you can see what everyone is saying. So very good. Most people have picked develop the app itself. Very good, because we really first need to start with developing the actual tool that the teachers will be using. Absolutely. And then training sessions for teachers on how to use the tool. So even if you make the tool available, for awareness and for ease of use, they will need some training. It's interesting that very few people chose purchase mobile phones for teachers, which is good because we already said that teachers already have mobile phones. So you don't need to necessarily give them another phone. This would be good use of resources on something else rather than providing them with the phone. We're going to try and utilize what's already there. And then build teacher training centers in all school districts. If that was really an option, you wouldn't develop a mobile phone app. You would have put them in those centers in the first place. But usually building something like that takes a lot of resources, right? So very good. So this is where you're all thinking about the actual program, okay? Now we're going to ask you the second question, which is about the research itself. So here's another question coming your way. This is where University of Learning wants to conduct the applied research on the program itself. What research activities will you like to conduct to examine whether and how the program worked? Okay. Okay. Get your answers in very quickly. Okay, I see a few more people responding. Okay, we are stopping the poll now and I'll show you the results. All right. Looks like everyone's on board with this as well. A very good way to test to see whether skills were developed or not is to do a pre-test and a post-test of teachers and see what knowledge they gained after using the app. Very good. Then do a more qualitative analysis by interviewing, collect more data on qualitative stuff, by interviewing teachers, head teachers, students, and parents to really see the long-term impact of what's happening and see how they're experiencing it. Something very simple that can be done is collect data on teacher usage of the app. Are they actually using it? That follows through with your logic of, are the activities happening? Are they resulting in some of the early outcomes? And then focus group of university professors. I see very few people chose that, which is good because, again, the university professors are not necessarily the primary audience for your intervention. So it may not be the best use of your resources to actually have focus groups with them. Great. All right. Let me stop sharing the screen for a second here and restart. 1 second. All right. So when you're describing the activities itself, often we have a tendency to just list out every activity that happens. But a better way to explain to your audience on how activities lead to the results is to create an activities pathway. So really showing like what will happen, when, and the logical steps of activities will really show that you've actually timed everything to flow into each other, and you have a logic of how things move to get to the outcomes. So maybe the first thing you would do is a needs assessment, then recruit some trainees. While doing that, you also develop the app, test the app, develop the training content while the app is being developed. Then you can only train the teachers. And then based on the training of the teachers, you may in parallel start developing the teacher guides, or develop a pilot one first, train some teachers, improve the teacher guides, things like that. So have an activities pathway there. Then comes the logic of results. So how are these activities then going to actually yield results? Now, results is an umbrella term for lots of different things. Often results can refer to outputs, which is a direct result of your activities, which is basically something that's within the sphere of control of the project team. So conducting a needs assessment. Now, what you will find out from the needs assessment is not under your control, but actually conducting the needs assessment is in your control. That can be the output you show to your funder, that here's an output. We have results of the needs assessment. Here's a report. That's an output. Or the training, you say you develop the teacher training guide and then you deliver the training. The delivery of the training is an output, but the number of teachers who actually attend the training may not necessarily be in your control. Then comes an outcome, which is some of the results that are out of your control. That's what you hope to see, but you can't exactly control them, but influence. And these are things that you would usually be able to see through the program timeline itself. So while you're implementing the program, or right towards the end of the program. So this would be something like the teachers are actually using the app, right? So that usage data will start giving you that early outcome. Sorry, can everyone see the, okay, all right. Sorry, I had a little technical difficulty on my side, but moving on. Impact is the ultimate long-term change that you're expecting to see. So if your goal is improve teacher skills, how would you even know what teacher skills are? This is probably where you're starting to do classroom observations, and then maybe in 3-4 years, teachers will start demonstrating that they've fully learned something from the app, and then they're implementing it in the classroom. So that's a long-term impact. And again, this is what the team hopes to achieve, but does not mean that it will necessarily happen. When you show the logic of everything you're doing in the activities and why that will lead to these outcomes, then it becomes very clear to your funder that you have thought through, and there's a logic and there's a sense making here on how activities are leading to the results. So they have more confidence in your ability to actually deliver the results. So we'll do one more exercise here. And this time we'll just use the chat message, okay? So let's think about the same program and think about what change in the system do you expect to achieve with a teacher professional development app, okay? I've given a few examples. Let's see what other ideas you can come up with. Okay. So this is where we're thinking about what is the outcome? What's the big impact that you want to see? Higher number of teachers trained, improve knowledge of teachers. Yes. Yep. Improve teacher skills, learning outcomes. This is for students. Exchanging of experience. Yes. Teachers might actually use the app to actually exchange information. Flexible access to information, yes. Increased access for education, yep. Great, yes. Fantastic. We're already thinking about there's so many ways to get to that. And this is where in your description, you will narrow down and give justification for why you think your activities will lead to this kind of change. So let's try one more question here, which has to do with the research side of things. What changes would you expect to see if you do research on the program implementation? What is the impact of the research itself? Okay, I see answers still coming for the last one. Effectiveness of the online training, yes. Policy, yes, your research can then impact policy at a larger level where you will be able to show the results of this and guide policy improvement. Scaling up, yes, it can help figure out how to then deliver it to a larger number of teachers or in another area. Improve the quality of TPD, yep. Finding the impact, yep. How effective everything is. Okay, thank you. We'll pause on the monitoring, learning, and evaluation. That we will talk about that at the end of this workshop. You're absolutely right. That is definitely a part of it. Okay. All right, let's move on. I just wanted to show you one example of things that I had quickly put together. This is not comprehensive at all, but here's an example for this program on how your theory of change diagram could potentially look like. This is fairly similar to a logic model or a log frame diagram. It can be presented as a table format or in this format, but pay attention to the arrows, right? You're showing these inputs will facilitate, the inputs being funds, mobile phones, app developers, staffing. These inputs will facilitate actually implementing the activities, things like developing of the program, mobile phone apps, training sessions, or the research activities, pre-test, post-test, interviews, things like that. And that's what's going to lead to the outputs. And these if we are seeing within the program that these outputs are actually happening, the program is able to deliver these things, then we will start seeing that some of the early outcomes will start happening, that the teachers are using the app, and some slightly later outcomes like improvement in skills is happening. And then overall, that can have the impact on student learning, scaling up of the app itself to more teachers, findings incorporated in the teacher professional development policies. So a diagram can look like this, or it could look like other types of diagrams with arrows showing a much more sophisticated pathways. But for a proposal, I would suggest keeping it simple and not complicating it too much. For your internal monitoring and evaluation and later on reports, you could go more in depth with this theory of change. Then very quickly, the last bits of it, in your theory of change, you have to also describe assumptions and risks. This is something you'll have to describe for your program descriptions anyway, but theory of change gives you that tool as well. As I mentioned, assumptions are conditions for success, what you think should exist in the context for you to be able to achieve the results that are not really, these conditions are not really in your control, but you're assuming that they're already there, okay? So example for this, something that we have already assumed is that teachers actually have access to a smartphone, because we are thinking about creating a TPD app. What we do know, teachers have phones, but it's very much possible not all teachers would have a smartphone. Maybe they have a very simple mobile phone where this kind of an app cannot be delivered. So that's an assumption we are making. And then that all teachers actually have reliable internet connections. We know that in a lot of reports, it says people have good internet connection, but the types of app, it might be too heavy for the type of internet connection these teachers have. So that's an assumption we are making. Risks, on the other hand, are more about conditions for failure. So obstacles that may come up later on. And that is something you cannot predict fully, but you think given the context, it may happen. You want to be transparent with your funders right from the beginning when you're putting your proposal together, to show them that you have already thought about these things. Sometimes they may even ask you to give mitigating activities for this. So if you already think that there's a possibility of something happening, they would ask you to explain, like, if it happens, what would your team do to make sure that it doesn't negatively impact the project too much? So something like teachers' workload does not allow them to actually spend time on the TPD app. Now, that is something you're pretty sure that won't happen, but there's a chance that will happen with some teachers. So how are you going to think about fixing that? Or that there's a natural disaster and all internet satellites are gone. There's no tower happening, so there is no connection. And now for days, teachers don't have access to the app. Maybe you would think about trying to make sure that every school somehow has an offline version of the training as well, so teachers can keep up with it when the internet is not there. So these are just some things that I'm thinking about, but you should think about that and already put it in your proposal. We will pause here for Q&A before getting into some of the budget and other issues.
Thank you so much, Amy. Arushi, we have here some questions. Let me try to go for the ones that were asked a little bit earlier. There are different types of questions. I'll go first from Arshad Ali from Aga Khan University in Pakistan. And Arshad asked if there is any major difference in proposal writing for academic purposes or for projects. Can you give us a little bit this overview? I know who would like to jump on this one, of either Arushi or Amy.
Sure.
Amy, you can go first.
Great. Yeah, I think possibly when this question was asked, Arushi just jumped in with like the difference there in her first slide, if you recall. Looking at just like what the project design is versus just the research itself. So sorry, can you repeat the question? What is the difference between the applied research and the project design?
So the question was that Arshad Ali from Pakistan was asking if there are any major difference in proposal writing for academic purposes or for projects. This is both.
Gotcha. Yeah, so I think for project design, we're looking at what Arushi just talked about, looking at the theory of change. You're doing research on the activities that you're proposing rather than just research on something that's already existing in that context.
I would add one more thing to that on the justification side, because that will depend on your reader. So if the funder is very much a funder that normally funds projects, not research, but this is the first time, or this is an unusual situation where they have decided to also fund an applied research along with the project, in the justification, for a pure academic audience, you would probably want to have a very comprehensive literature review, right? And the literature review would provide things like within the country, what is the data, what is the research, everything like that. And then maybe even bringing in some findings globally that might be applicable to that context. But very much going for an academic audience and giving that evidence-based literature data to justify why you're doing what you're doing or what the gap is, things like that. For a more practitioner audience in your funder, you would want to simplify that. You would want to demonstrate that everything you're doing is evidence-based, but the language you will use to come up with a theoretical answer or a theoretical conceptual framework, things like that, you would need to simplify that quite a bit because they may not have the expertise in reading that type of justification from the academic perspective, or they won't have the time. Honestly, a lot of times the factor is time, and you will notice the word limits for a lot of these proposals will be very, very short. So you won't be able to do the full literature review justification in there.
Okay, great points raised. I have here Hassan Zahid from Pakistan. He already asked the question more than once, and we should address it. Senior Research Specialist for Pakistan from the Social Policy and Development Center wants to know if secondary data regarding an early childhood education research project is not available, if they could use data, gender disaggregated data from the overall context on their education system. I think this is a concern that a lot of our experts face when there is not enough data. So if either Amy or Rushi would like to comment on this.
Sure. Yeah, I think that if gender data is relevant to that specific research proposal, then yes, you can look at the wider context. It could be that the lack of data in that area is a gap that you might want to highlight. It's also an opportunity. But I think first and foremost, you want to think about is that data, or like the lack or availability of that data, relevant to your purpose, the gap that you're trying to use as the evidence for supporting your proposal or not. And then providing the data that you have and highlighting where there might be an opportunity for you to collect more data on that issue. I don't know, Rishi, if you want to add anything there.
No, I completely agree. It has to be relevant to what you're designing. And then if there is some data available from another context, how applicable or relevant it is to your context. So you have to judge that.
Okay. So a very quick question, and I think will be also a quick answer. One was Professor Jayanta Lal, who is our national coordinator in Sri Lanka, who asked if there is an accepted project proposal template. I think you addressed it, but I think it's good that we remind this, because this was also asked by Kil Narayan Shrestha, who asked, can we get the proposal writing guidelines sample? So looking for templates, for best practices, if you can share a little bit the vision that we were sharing before in the presentation about this.
Right. So I think there isn't a template for every single call for proposals. There are some common elements that we looked at earlier on that you can most of the time assume that they'll exist in a proposal in some form or another. But I would recommend that you create your own sort of template based on the guidelines that the call for proposal offers you. So if that call for proposal has like 12 sections, that you design your template and you put the bullets there to sort of complete as a team. So you're designing the template based on that specific call. But we've shared tips here in this workshop that will help you fill out those common elements that you might see across call for proposals.
One more thing to add to that is in several calls for proposals, they will give you very specific guidelines on your proposal should include these 10 things, which are sections that they will tell you about. And then sometimes they will also have an assessment rubric, which will say, what is the weightage that they're putting on each of the sections? So how much would your budget count versus how much would your explanation of applied research count? How much of your explanation on justification count? So you will see that. And based on that, also work with your team on who's going to put how much effort where. But there's no one template. It will depend on the request for proposal. And it will really depend on what is it that you're trying to write.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a message that we need to echo. You need to build your proposal in accordance with the specific terms of your calls. So every call is different, so we need to be fit to that purpose. There are a lot of questions. I have here a question from Kyrgyzstan now, from Gulyam Anarbakova. If the risks are too big, so when you are assessing the risks, do you think she's asking if the application might be rejected when they are assessing the risks and putting the proposal together? If there is a risk of the proposal being rejected, if you could comment on this.
Yes. So while you're assessing the risk yourself, think about it on if it's looking like it's too big to you, is it worth doing the project the way you are designing it? If you can already see that risk is too big, maybe you already want to start putting in some mitigation factors within your design. So you can just start explaining that right away in your program description to give confidence to your funder that you will be actually able to implement the project. So most funders are scared of the project never starting. So even if something is awarded, that money is sitting there because it's been awarded, and then the implementing partners are just never able to start. Or the project stopping in the middle, right? So never completing. So that way funders would think that their money is wasted. So that is what they're assessing on which projects will actually successfully complete and get to the results versus which ones may not get there. So yes, if the risks are too big, it will probably get rejected. So start thinking about mitigating factors within your design.
Amy, would you like to add any points? Should we go for another question?
No, I think that sounds good. I was just gonna say, having the risks there is to acknowledge that you've thought through the proposal and that you're acknowledging that there are these risks and you have a plan. So it shows that you have thought through everything. By not including risks, it may indicate that you haven't thought through all of these permutations or possibilities of things that you might have to address at some point.
Okay, I think we should take a couple of more questions, otherwise we'll have a lot of questions at the end. So we have now a question from Indonesia. Yusuf is a researcher in Indonesia, and he's directing his question specifically on TOC, the theory of change. And he's asked, maybe there is some need for clarification here. He's asked why input is focusing on resources rather than urgency or existing conditions. Where can we input the reason why we do the development? I'm reading his question. I think you got to the point. So I wish if you wanted to comment on that.
Yes, so that is a good question for clarification. So the place where you will address why the project even needs to get done, that goes into the justification. Usually that will be in your introduction section or in the identification of gap section, the need for this project section, which usually comes before you describe what is it that you're going to do. So in the theory of change itself, we are starting with the assumption that we know this needs to happen. The input there is more going into, then what do you need to make this happen? So that's how inputs are being defined in theory of change.
Okay, I think I'm aware of the time. There are a lot of questions that I'm going to put here, save it for later, and let's move forward with the workshop because we still have a lot of things to cover, and there are some questions that address some of the topics that we'll cover in the next sections. So now I hand over to Russia, maybe to continue, or Arusha? Russia? So
Russia.
Yes, the floor is yours, Russia.
Thank you, Jose, and thank you, Amy and Arushi, for paving the way to the how, which is going to address the methodology, budget, and timelines. For the how part, the project design and methodology, I would focus on the selection of research methods. What research methods would be the most appropriate for the selected scope of work for the research? And are you going to, Arushi, to move the slides? Or yes. So again, this was presented earlier by Amy, and I would focus on two of them. The first two of them. Move to the next slide, please, Rishi. The first two ones, the type of research to pilot innovation on a small scale and then scale it up. This might be a methodology or a trend, and to gather evidence on the effectiveness of a contextually appropriate solution, if this solution is really appropriate for this context, And you can use different types of research. Action research could be one of them. But action research is normally implemented on a small scale. But if you want to go on a national level or on a regional level implementation for an applied research, you might need to go to quantitative and qualitative or mixed method. Each one of them would be fit for a better purpose. So if you go on to the box that is next to the first line, you'd find that were there any relevant research projects somewhere in the world that worked, hence promising to work in the context? So you say, like, for example, this has worked in country X and country Y, which is similar into the socioeconomic factors in my country. So it would most probably be working in my context. So you'd learn from their experience and to start implementing in your own context. How are you responding to the local context? What specificity are you considering? Governance system. So are you in a decentralized context like Pakistan or a centralized context like Maldives or Tunisia or Egypt? So what would be working better for your own governance system and relationship between provinces and the ministry and local authorities and schools? Is it rural or urban, about the cultural differences and cultural diversity? So you'd be looking for the methodology and the research method that would really fit your purpose. And for this, we normally, if you would scan different proposals that has been funded before for applied research, you'd notice that they are always they would always mix quantitative with qualitative. They would use mixed methods. For this, they would need quantitative data surveys that would gather data from the floor, and qualitative to say, why is this working and how this could be working better? So it's like it's the marriage between quantitative and qualitative that is the majority of proposals, but of course it depends on the scope you're proposing. And this would define what type of tools you're going to be used, how you're going to collect your data. So as the example mentioned earlier by Arushi, whether it's going to be a pre-test or a post-test, right, to measure the skill gap or the skill development, or you're going to have a focus group interviews if it's qualitative component, or in-depth interviews if you want one-to-one and you're working with teachers with big numbers, or few leaderships that would need one-to-one in-depth interviews. So it would decide, your sample would decide as well partially your tools that are going to be used. Are you going to use observations? Like there have been very interesting research proposals who used observations and photos to monitor nutrition habits, for example, for children. So as well, the topic would really decide about the use tools, surveys, learning assessment and achievement scores about their learning and their acquired competencies, skills and knowledge, and so on. So the next box would tell you some questions that would relate to those. Are you developing your tools from scratch? So are you going to invent your tools and then validate the tools from experts and validate the tools and have a dry run, or are you going to adapt it from a previously tested and validated tools? So probably you can use this tool that has been developed and cited from this research and from this project, and then adapt it to your own local context. And as well, your sample design. How many are you going to interview? How many are you going to disseminate surveys among? And this would be as well an answer for the types of data collection tools that you're going to be using. Next, please, Arushi. Then it would take us to the same excerpt that has been shared before. If University of Learning is doing this on mobile applications, training teachers on the use of mobile applications for skills development on the use of technology. Then what would be the next slide would ask you, and I would like to request your responses in the chat, please. If you're going to consider the example given earlier about the skills development in the field of technology, which research methodology would fit better? All right, whether are you going to use number one, yes, qualitative action research mixed method. Which one is going to be or experimental? Please write the number that corresponds to the answer in the chat. So Linda wants to use action research. All right, mixed method. All right, mixed method. 4. It's mixed method. All right, yes, mixed method. All right. So some would, again, would go for action research. All right. Okay. So 1 and 2 is mixed method. Though it's really, yes, mixed method, because it would work on 2 different axes. The one which is the survey that would identify quantitative data about their preferences and whether this is working, whether this is not working. And the qualitative which would look into their beliefs and their culture and their willingness, the real willingness to apply, and whether they would feel threatened, for example. So qualitative was going to dig into other things that would really make teachers use the tool after training, because you might choose a state-of-art technology. You can go to an AI model think software and you train teachers, but they wouldn't be willing to use it in real life. So qualitative would work on the belief and on the value system of teachers and of the target groups mostly, to look at ways to make this more successful and more applicable as well. So yes, you're right, the majority, if some of you have proposed action research would be related to a very small scope of implementation on a level of a classroom or something, and would not be eligible for funding for a national level types of projects. So it would also depend on the scale of implementation that we're applying for. So if you're a graduate student who's applying for a small funding from your department for a master or a PhD dissertation, you might go for an action research. But if you're applying for regional or national funds, I mean, this is going to be a very small scale of control. So you would need to go to a bigger scale for quantitative and qualitative, which is mixed method. Next slide, please. Then this would take us to the how about the time planning. Arushi has shared before the timeline about the scope of control and a scope that is beyond the control, I mean, of influence. And this would take us to, if we are going to apply this on our time plan, if we get a table where we have in the next slide, if we're going to have this table, yes, having the activities provided into columns. The columns could be Q1, Q2, month 1, month 2, I mean, according to the duration. And you would say which activity would start first and which activity can run parallel and which activity would flow after the second one. And then this would take us to different types of tables afterwards. The budget tables, because in each activity is going to be transferred into resources that is going to be costed out. And for this timeline, you would consider the relationship between activities. So if you have a relationship between activities start to start, so 2 activities must start together. You've decided to start needs assessment with the recruitment of trainers. So those are 2 activities that would start together, or start to end. After you finish the needs assessment, you might consider the training, but you cannot start training before finishing needs assessment. I mean, this is a matter of logic. Or it's end-to-end, that those activities should be ending together. 2 activities that would need to end together so as they would meet at the end for a certain purpose. And this is why if you would consider the proposed example of the training of teachers on the mobile application, here you'd have a critical path, which is the red one, that would, no delay can be tolerated. Which is needs assessment, that is going to be followed by app design and testing, then would be followed by teacher training. And then the teacher training would be accompanied by, I mean, by the time teachers would end teacher training, they should have a teacher guide ready for them to use into the field. So this would show the relationship of the time planning and the sequence, the logical sequence of activities into the activities table and the time planning form. Then we would move on now to the budgeting. So if you can manage to have a table for resources, so here you'd have, before that, please, yes, here would have teacher training assessment, and then with recruitment of training, then it's going to be followed by the app design and development of training content. Then it's going to be followed by teacher training. The development of guide can start from earlier, and this would show the highlighting of the time cells that would correspond to your time planning. All right, and then later on we would go to the budget. And for the budget, we say that money talks, right? And yes, Money Talks, it tells you about, next slide, please, Arushi. It tells you about this an activity. Can you think of a very first activity that is to take place in any applied research project? So if you're going now, if you have assumed that you've got the funding in your bank account and you've signed the contract with the granting agency, what would be the very first activity that's going to take place? Right. I mean, improvise. Please write your responses into the chat box. Desk research, all right. Literature review and desk research. Thank you, Hassan. Baseline survey, Arwa. All right, excellent. Okay, data collection, orientation, needs assessment. All right, okay. What else? What would be the very first activity that's going to take place in an applied research project? Orientation, all right. I would start with that. Is that the first the plan, the project is the plan, the project document is the plan that is going to be used, the orientation and purpose of research. So it's the kickoff meeting. So the first thing that is going to start is the coordination and management into the management. So a research proposal, I mean, you'd not be able to go into the field and to apply your research activities without having a management into the background. So the first thing is that the orientation that you've mentioned, the coordination, and the meeting with the team. So kickoff meeting would be the first thing to start with. And then we would decide whether we want to go then by needs assessment or anything else. Next slide, please, Arushi. So yes, it's the kickoff meeting where the research team members meet and plan project management activities together, so and be on the same page. Inception meeting. Thank you, Phil. Then the budget. Money talks. Yes, money tells how efficient you are, and there's a difference between effectiveness and efficiency. Effectiveness would decide whether you'd be able to meet your objective or not, to achieve your objective or not, and to achieve your goal. But efficiency is achieving your goal in the best possible resources with the very, with the highest return on investment. So if we take the example that was raised earlier about the technology training for teachers on the mobile application, there has been two options. One of them is like building a training center, and the other one is developing an app, or buying mobile phones for all teachers, or using a mobile or a computer lab at school, which is, I mean, they're both meeting the same objective. They would both achieve the goal, but one would be much more efficient than the other. And this is where the scores on the budgets happen. What is the effectiveness and what is the efficiency in spending? So this would identify as well the budget line items or the resources that you're going to be using. And then we would go now, there are like different types of resources. We have assets like buildings, and normally those assets are not eligible for funding. So if you think of like buying a car or building a new building or buying equipment, I mean, most of the granting agencies would consider this as an asset that the applying organization should be having already. And that would be as well at the same time seen as a risk on sustainability. So you don't have, you would start from scratch how sustainable this is. How can you buy new resources? How can you buy new computers? How can you buy new equipment and so on? So we need to check the eligibility section on the budget line items, what the grant can cover and what the grant cannot cover. Next slide, please, Arushi. So those are like, if the objective is strengthen teachers' capacity using mobile applications, then types of resources could be assets like buying laptops, tablets, computers, or apps and content development. Are these assets justifiable? Are you eligible for funding? If yes or no, we need to know. We need to check the application form. Other resources could be in the form like other alternatives, using a computer lab at a nearby college, or students and teachers using their own devices. If this is an option, that's better. I mean, this would allocate more money for the implementation and for the research itself. Another factor that you need also to consider, if next please, Arushi. Are they cost effective? I mean, if the project timeline is 3 to 5 years, it might be cost effective because the device timeline is about this range. So a computer or a tablet the lifetime is about between 3 to 5. So yes, it's going to cover the lifetime of the project, but then we would need to worry about sustainability afterwards because we need to prove that this effort is going to be sustainable. But maybe not a high-end feature. So the features as well and the cost is really, really important. Will they be sustained after the project lifetime? That's another question that we need an answer to. Then we have then an activity. So another click, please. Yes. If the objective is the same, strengthening the capacity of teachers, please write in the chat all resources possible that you can be using for this purpose. So if a training workshop on using mobile application is going to take place, what resources would you need for the training workshop? So now we're costing out activity by activity. So a training workshop on using mobile application, what will you be needing? What resources? And the unit cost. So if this resource is X, how much is the unit? And how many units would you be needing? So it would make a total of X and Y and Z, US dollars or Canadian dollars or euros or something. Internet connection, very good internet connection, yes. And that's a real threat in many cases, right? Experts, yes. Trainers, phones, trainers, yes, very good. Okay, salaries, we call them staff cost because we do not normally hire people for full-time for projects. So it's like staff cost or mobile phones and tablets, okay, devices, smart devices that we're going to use in the training. Food, thank you, Kelly. And sometimes like breaks. I mean, people would be staying on premises for a long day. They would need some coffee and some refreshments, lunch maybe, and so on. So food might be needed as refreshments. Yes, exactly. Thank you very much. All right. Okay. All right. Servers or internet service, materials like printouts, worksheets, space. Yes, if you're going to have a venue to rent or something. Brilliant. Next slide, please, Arushi. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Transportation, if you're going to move a number of teachers, snacks, trainer supplies. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yes. So we have here an example of a budget table for one activity. Like we have trainers, 4 man days, if it's going to be like 4 training days. And the cost per unit is $200 US, for example, per day. So for this component, you would need $800 US. The training venue rentals for 2 days for 500, and then it's 1,000. Training material preparation, if you have folders, printouts, and things like that. Transportation, 4 trips, as you've mentioned, exactly. Internet service for this amount of money, and other, if I'm like for refreshments and meals and lunch, and so this would be the total cost of one activity, and it goes on and on for all the activities into the proposal. Next slide, please, Arushi. Yeah, so if you have any now research ideas in mind that you're thinking of, and this would bring us to the part where I hand over to Arushi, because she's going to work with you on other aspects of the proposal. And for this, I would like to highlight that some of the research tools might be used for research implementation, and some other tools might be used for monitoring, for example. So in the example that was mentioned earlier by Arushi, she asked if the usage of the application. Usage of application might be an indicator for a monitoring indicator, whether people are really using the application or not, whereas pre and post test would be for the gain of skills and the competencies and the learning and the gap, meeting the gap. So Arushi, I hand over to Arushi. Thank you very much. And please write any questions into the chat.
Thank you, Rasha. So I will go through the next section quickly, and then we will open up for questions. So we will have plenty of time for you to ask Rasha some questions on the budget and timelines and things like that, and the research methodologies. So I'm going to just give you a quick wrap up of so what. So in most calls for proposals, you will also see a section on monitoring and evaluation and learning. which is where the funders are asking, how will you demonstrate to them that you're on track with the project? How will you monitor internally for yourself that you're achieving all the milestones that you wanted to achieve, that you're being successful through the length of the project, so that at the end you would have potentially achieved all your objective, your actual impact and goal. So that's where a lot of the so what comes in. And then for the entire research, entire project, you will do all of this research. How are you going to share it with a larger audience? So a lot of the monitoring and evaluation in an applied research project can be done simultaneously. So the research that you're doing, the data you're collecting for the research can also be used for your own internal monitoring and reporting back to the funder that you're on track. So it's similar to the things that you're collecting for outputs, outcomes, and impacts. What needs to happen that the funders need to see clearly is what kind of indicators, like, are you going to use to see whether something is happening or not. So you still go with the explanation of what outputs, what outcomes, and what impact you see. But then you have to define, how are you going to measure that? How will you see that this happened? So you have to create indicators, and an easy way to remember what is a good indicator is SMART metrics. So your indicators should be very specific. They should be measurable, as in everyone can agree that that is the number or that is something that actually happened. They should be achievable. Don't make something a very, very ambitious indicator like within the first year, you will reach 100% of the teacher population that you're trying to get to. No, make it small, right? Which is similar to time bound. So maybe make it so that in the first 6 months, you would have done this, then in a year, you would have reached these many people, things like that, and make it very relevant to your project. Don't start collecting things and try to collect at a national level when your project is only happening in a very small area. So make your indicators very, very specific, okay? So an example here for the outputs, developing the teacher development app, you have an indicator that the app actually works, right? So you have an indicator showing the app has no more errors, it's working. There's a test that happens. Teacher training, you have an indicator for the output, a number of teachers who actually attended the training. Then for your research side of things, develop a research report. Your output is the actual report. That is very specific, right? Everyone can see, observe that it's there. Then for outcomes, this is where often we start being a little too ambitious and they're not usually achievable when we are getting too ambitious. So here also start being like, what is actually achievable and observable, measurable during the project time. So teachers use your outcome was that teachers actually use the app. So maybe here you can be very specific, not just, yes, a teacher logged in, but more the number of hours the teachers and how many teachers were actually using the app. The skills improvement, actually difference in the scores between pre-test and post-test. Improve stakeholder awareness of the app so people actually know about the app. What is the survey result on how many people actually now know about the app? That could be your research result. And similar, you go down the line with impact as well. Then in your research proposal itself, you would need to describe to your funder on what resources you're putting towards actually managing this entire monitoring, evaluation, and learning system. Your primary researchers would probably be too busy conducting the research on the program. They will not necessarily have the time to develop the reports for the funder or to sit down and really observe everything that is happening, do the monitoring and do the analysis on what needs to change in the project. So you may need additional staff there. You may need data management systems there. So you have to describe that on how is it that you're going to be measuring all of that. So usually in any research proposal, especially for applied research, there will be some kind of a monitoring and evaluation section you would need to describe how you're going to go about doing this. And this is where, if you've created a theory of change in your project description itself, you can reuse that same table and add on the indicators to that in your M&E section. Then let's say you're now thinking after the project or towards the end of the project. We've assumed that you will achieve all of the results. You need to tell your funders right in the proposal on how you're planning on disseminating this information, okay? How will you actually share all of the knowledge that you've gained? Now, I've listed a few things that typically get used, but this always depends on the context and the audience that you want to reach, the stakeholders that you actually want to reach. So here are just some examples. And I would suggest that you put some ideas on how do you normally share your results. So a lot of you are either within academia or in a research institution, and some of you are at the program level. You're always producing reports. How do you usually share it? The examples I've provided here are publishing reports online on some major website or other clearinghouses, publishing in journals, publishing working papers that are before the journal articles get approved, presentations at conferences or big events, creating for a different audience that can absorb the information very quickly, some kind of a graphic, short text, social media, flyers, handouts. What else would you think about using? Country reports and presentations, but where would you put that? Does your institution have a website? Maybe approach the funders on would they be able to put the reports online and reach a wider audience? Presentations, yes. You would make presentations to the relevant audience. Maybe you would even plan an event yourself and invite the right stakeholders in there to do the dissemination. Policy briefs, yes. Policy briefs would really be geared towards government officials who can quickly read it and then implement the basic learnings from your research. Yep, have some workshops. Yep, presentation plus social media, yes. Infographics, institutional blogs, yeah. I would say you could also use the KIX EMAP website where we can be publishing some of your blogs. So once you have the findings and you're within the EMAP countries and it's an education policy research, we would be happy to publish that. Okay, I will stop here. This is kind of the end of our presentation, and I know lots of questions are coming up. So let me stop here and please go ahead. Or I will give the floor to José Luis to start asking and summarizing some of the questions here.
So thanks so much, Arushi, Rasha, for the presentation just now. Let me try to address first the questions that came in directly after Rasha's presentation. There's a question here on addressing what comes first. What things should we think first when we're developing the proposal? Ciro Danusa from Indonesia asks, should we develop the TOC first and decide which methodology should be used, or should we do it simultaneously? Also, maybe this can also be addressed in terms of the budget. When should we think about this? If you could comment, Rasha, and also Arushi, if you want to come in, or
Thank you for it's a very good question. We normally start by the theory of change. I mean, and then you translate the activities that you're deciding or thinking about in the theory of change into then a methodology part. How are you going to go about it? So theory of change is the mind, and then activities is the muscles. So, and then we translate afterwards the activities into budget line items. And of course, we would think about the scope of implementation based on the limits of the budget. So if the fund is like 100,000 is different from 2 million. I mean, it's a different scope with a different logic on budgeting and costing out. But one major mistake that I would like to warn warn our fellow researchers from doing is that not to give the budget to the accountant, because normally, I mean, we're the academia people, we go and write the theory and write the methodology and things like that, and then we forward the file to the accountant to do the costing out. But you should be the one identifying the needed resources first, and then the accountant can help with like getting offers, estimating costs, and so on. But you're going to be the one deciding on the resources needed first. And to Arushi, please.
I would have the same response. So let's move on to the next question.
Okay, so there is now a couple of questions related to the measurement of result, and I think Arushi, you can start to address them, and then also Rush and Amy can complement. So there is this one that just came from Kinley from Bhutan, our country representative in Bhutan. Kinley says, I understood the output, outcome, and impact parts, but I'm not so clear with the indicators. I would be happy if you could explain more on the indicators. And then she tags you, Arushi. And there is also another question from Linda Pino from Albania, who, when you were presenting the different types of ways to measure results, Linda Pino was asking if an indicator tracking table could also be acceptable as one of the ways to measure results. So if you can combine both questions if you want to answer, Arushi.
Yes, sorry if the indicators part felt a bit rushed, but overall, what an indicator is the actual data that will help you measure whether the output or the outcome or the impact actually happened. So you need to be able to tell your funders right from the beginning on how you will demonstrate that something is happening. And within your project, you're also using that to monitor whether something is happening. So as I said, output is something that is within the control, right? So if we say needs assessment, right? How will you measure whether a needs assessment took place or not? That is the output, right? A needs assessment report. And that can be something very, very simple. A report is developed on needs assessment, one report, that's it. Your number is one needs assessment report, tick. You have now shown to your funders that that activity happened and there was an output for it. And within your team itself, you circulate that. But then something more complicated is training, right? You want to say that the training took place. So 5 training sessions provided to 2 districts, let's say that's happening. Now, an easy output indicator there is literally just saying 5 training sessions of 2 hours happened. So that's how specific you start going, right? So that's total of 10 hours of training. But a simple outcome there is the number of teachers who actually attend the training. So you have to say, how will you know that the training was actually delivered to the right people? Number of teachers attending the training, right? So just your attendance sheet, their names, your evidence is that attendance sheet itself. Then you're looking into something like, do teachers actually use the app? Then you're starting to measure something even more specific. Number of minutes spent on the app per teacher per week, something like that. So these are very, very specified measurements, which are being called indicators that are used within your team to see if something is happening, are you on track, but also to show to your funders, demonstrated to them that things are happening. Now, an indicators table, yes, if you already have something, whatever tools you have that can be clearly shown to your funders that you have a system for this, that's great. So yes, absolutely use that.
Okay. So
I can add something to this, please.
Go ahead.
There are like for each type of activity, they would like the specific indicators that would go through it. So if it's a training, for example, we normally use the Kirkpatrick model, which is 4 levels of indicator for reaction, satisfaction rates. Attendance rates, are people are attending the training and are they satisfied? And then learning, if you have a post-test or something that people have learned, and then transfer that this training has been taken to school to be implemented, and then impact, whether like achievement scores or things like that. There would be success indicators, there'd be quality indicators. You can be using reviewers, external reviewers, to see if your report that you're producing is really of good quality or not. You can have a adoption if the government is really going to implement and would have adoption or uptake of whatever you're producing into action, if it's part of the implementation you're aspiring to. So different types of indicators that would link to the type of activity you're conducting.
Okay, so let's go for another question on the topic of data availability. And I think this is a concern and a challenge that many of our colleagues here in the call face. Venkat from India was saying that the challenge he faces is that one must decide between official statistics versus other data that were generated through ad hoc studies. How do you deal with this challenge that we also face, right? If you want to share your experience, who would like to start first?
I can go ahead. This will be a decision making you will have to do when you're developing those indicators, right? The achievable is not just achievable in like within your program, can you achieve it, but also is it a number that you will actually be able to collect? Now, sometimes we can say that we will rely on the official data, but when the quality of that official data is either very low, or maybe that data is not collected at the time that you're going to be implementing your activity. So something like school information on how many teachers are present in the school district itself. Usually that will happen at the beginning of the school year, but then the official data processing will take another year or so. So while you're implementing your project within that year, you won't have that data. So you would really need to judge for yourself on when can you rely on external data collected from somewhere else, and when you will need to, as in your team will need to collect the data. And that's where implications on resources go in. One would be budget resources. Will you need money to actually go do that data collection? And then two, people. That's what I was saying. Most probably your senior researchers won't have time to collect monitoring and evaluation type of data. They will have some of the data within their own research activities, but they won't have the time to actually systematically look at it in a monitoring and evaluation sense. This is where you may need to hire a monitoring and evaluation officer or assign specific people to make that linkage on monitoring and evaluation side and develop that indicator. So during the proposal writing phase, you're just going to have to think through that a little bit and indicate to your funder that you will rely on existing systems, or you will need funding or direct some of the budget towards monitoring and evaluation, staffing, and data collection.
Anyone else would like to add a point? Amy or Rasha? No? Okay, so we have a lot of questions that we cannot cover. But I want to choose here one question from Kyrgyzstan that I think it's very important that we think about. Which is our colleague from Kyrgyzstan, Gulaim Anarbekova, says that we apply several times and we don't get feedback on the rejected application. If we don't have feedback, how can we improve the next time we are working on the grants proposal? I think this is a challenge that we see across all countries. We see that we also face, because I think we need to be clear, it's not easy. All of us that are here have participated in grants that were not approved, so we have experience with unsuccessful grants as well. And something that maybe we need to reflect. I'd like to hear the opinion of the three of you of what our hub can do when there is this challenge that not receiving feedback, in terms of making sure that people have the knowledge and the skill to better understand and translate the needs of a specific call. Maybe we start with Amy this time, and then we go Rush and Arushi.
Sure. Yes, it's a challenge to not get feedback. One thing you might ask yourself if you've applied to one thing multiple times, is this grant the right fit for your project? And it could be that the answer is no. Another thing is that it could be just very, very competitive. Oftentimes, some of these calls have like hundreds of applicants. You might consider trying to, if you have the resources, to try to get someone else involved to evaluate your proposal, make some recommendations on what you might change or what you might enhance. I had one more idea and it flew out of my head. You could, revisit your proposal now. If there's something that you have in mind now, go through our presentation today and sort of check through the boxes. See if you can figure out yourself what you might think based on today's presentation you could do better. But a lot of times it's just relevance and just sheer numbers of people applying. You might consider having a partner. That was what I was going to say. Maybe it would make sense to partner up with somebody else who has expertise in that in that field that would offer some more marketability to your proposal. Okay, Arushi, Rasha, you can add on to that.
Yeah, from my own personal experience, in many cases, I mean, the first grant that I won was 2003, which is 20 years ago. And meanwhile, I've been like applying for many and then getting some accepted, some other times not being accepted. And I would always go to the accepted list. So I would have like a gap analysis between what was accepted and what I was applying for. And normally I would find that I would be aiming too high. The scope of my activities and the scope of my implementation is too good to be true. Whereas another accepted project is only working on a scale of a program or a district or something like that. So I would normally go to the accepted list and do the gap analysis.
Yeah, I would completely agree with both what Amy and Rasha said, especially looking at the list of people who did win. So most of the funders will at some point make that list public. In general, follow the funders. They try to, on their website, showcase who they're funding. Then follow those projects. What is it that those projects are doing that was different from what you were proposing? So learn from that. Another very practical thing is when you get that rejection letter, you could be brave and just go ahead and respond to the funders and ask if there's any feedback that they could give, right? Sometimes all it requires is asking, and asking is not going to hurt. They will not see it as a bother. If they don't have time for it, the worst that could happen, they won't respond. But if you ask, the best that could happen is you get a very specific response on what was happening, what was not acceptable within your proposal. So those would be two very practical things. And then what Amy said, try to see the list of organizations that have gotten funded in the past. If you are aware of other organizations that seem to be very successful, approach them and partner up with them. Often they will have you write a small part of the proposal and they will write the bigger part of the proposal. Learn from that experience and then go for it by yourself. We do that all the time. Individually, we've all done that. Organizationally, we have done that as well.
Wonderful. And I think the three of you complemented very well your answers. And I think we need to move to the closing. Before we need to move to the closing, I received here a direct message from one of the participants that is asking for samples of good grant proposals. If we could share a sample of grant proposals that were accepted. That's something that we can think internally, see if we can pull a couple of examples that people can work on. We did that for the KIX, the first proposal that NORAG applied for the KIX grant. But that's something that we can think about, and in the resources we'll share with all the participants. So now we move to the closing session.
Could I just add one thing to that, José Luis? A caution. So anytime you read a proposal that seems like a good grant proposal example, you have to see what was the funder planning on funding. Because a good grant proposal is all about responding to what the funder wants. It can be a fantastic grant proposal, but if it's not answering what the funder is wanting, it will get rejected and a different funder will accept it. So anytime you read a good grant proposal, don't follow it exactly as it is. See the context around it.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we go and share that, we need to share as well what was the call, what the call was requested, what the call was asking. Make sure that people can understand how the response to the call was made. So let's move to the closing part of our workshop today. First, thank you to everyone who made this a very, very lively learning session. Special thanks to the speakers, my colleagues Amy, Arushi, and Rasha, for sharing their knowledge and experience on this topic, and for the way you are continuing to support our hub. Thank you to the team of interpreters and for the whole EMAP Hub team that was involved in this event. And thank you as well to GPE and IDRC, who make the KIX program a reality and support our EMAP's Hub work. Now a couple of announcements. We are pasting in the chat a link to the open calls for KIX research on early learning and teaching. The deadline is on the 15th of January, so please look into that, see what is requested, and see if you'd like to apply. A document with a list of useful resources from this webinar, further reading, further exploring, will also be shared with you, as well as the chat, as well as the session recording and the PowerPoints will be also shared with all the participants today. You also have in the chat a link to the post-event survey. So please take a couple of minutes to fill it. Let us know what went well today, what was useful, and as well what we can do better. There are also links to our webpage, our EMAP Hub webpage on the NORA website, and to our social media platforms on Facebook and Twitter so that you can follow our work. We are approaching the end of this year of 2023, but still tomorrow we have another stop, and the stop is for the South Asian, Middle East, and North Africa Knowledge Cafe. So the Knowledge Cafe is an informal space for knowledge sharing on existing research and educational work in the South Asia, Middle East, and North Africa sub-region. Rasha Sharaf, who is the knowledge lead for that sub-region, will be leading this monthly gathering, and you can join tomorrow's, the one that is going to be tomorrow. It's going to be at 12:30 p.m. Geneva. The link now is being posted in the chat, so you can register for it if you'd like to know more about the work, educational work in the sub-region of South Asia, Middle East, and North Africa. We also usually receive a lot of requests to get certificates from the workshops. We will be sharing the link for a Google form that you can fill out your request. Please note that we are issuing certificates to all those that attended at least 60% of the workshop session. So on behalf of our team and our principal researcher, Professor Gita Steiner-Kamsi, who couldn't be here today, we wish you a great end of 2023, a better start of 2024. Thank you and look forward to seeing you all. Our KIX EMAP journey is just starting. See you all soon.